Everybody, thank you so much for joining us online. We're so excited to have you here. You are getting a look at our owl that has been graciously provided by Men's Club. So you have a 360 view of the room, and you'll be able to hear everyone, and everyone will be able to hear you during a question and answer period if we have such. I leave that to Rabbi Rosen. But if we have any audio issues, don't worry. We will figure them out.
There's a couple more people coming in from the waiting room.
Are there many people on the room?
Thousands.
But she has another class.
I know. Classes all over the building. It's great. Okay. Wait a second. While people are entering the waiting room or the meeting itself, why don't we just do a quick go around in this room at least? Hopefully we're going to find somebody getting the folks in Zoom on that screen. One PowerPoint, and Lord knows what will happen, but we'll give it a try. Michael,
I'm Michael Schenker.
I'm Susan Checker. I'm Joe Cohen.
Ron Cullen.
Carol Goldberg. I'm not Nicole Goldberg or Schenker. I'm Diane Clark. And I have none of them. I prefer to be the last. I'm Maura Nemero. Paul Weinberger, Fran Weinberger. Thank you, Laura.
okay, well, welcome everybody. You'll let me know when we can start if you don't mind.
Are these for us? We write on them?
You can do whatever you would like.
You know what, Rabbi? I said we'd begin promptly at 7. So I say let's go for it.
Let's do it. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and I'm going to do my best to be in touch with two different groups of folks at the same time. So please let me know if there are any sound issues or anything else, and we'll do our best to correct them. And I'm very grateful for your participation, and thank you for joining us tonight. I want to just reflect very, very briefly on a sad reality that I think is very much at the forefront of many of our minds, all of our minds, and that is that we are still, I think, very overwhelmed by the terrible, tragic news of the killing of Blancanellis earlier this week. His family is now back in West Hartford and Chicago locally. And one of the things we do in Jewish life to commemorate and to honor those that are lost to us is to spend some time in study, Jewish reflection. And that is very, very much part of Ilan's life. And I think we do him honor in pursuing that very same kind of direction. So let's make that a dedication to his memory this evening. So I'm sure that there may have been some interesting questions in your minds, at least, as to what it is that we're hoping to do here. It is admittedly a bit ambitious, but let me just tell you what I have in mind. And this is going to be something where I really hope that we're going to be able to involve all of you in one form or another, be it here or remotely. And that is basically this. The whole idea that at a certain point, you want to reflect upon what is this whole enterprise of being Jewish about occurs to me. I mean, fundamentally, I ask myself, I think you do too, from what I know of you, is, what are we doing? Why do we dedicate ourselves in various ways to this experience that we call the Jewish journey, Judaism as a whole, whatever it might be? We have the elements of the moment, right? So the calendar hinges now on Purim, which then gives way quite quickly into Passover and all of the joy and the terror that engenders in terms of the word, right? And so we have that. We know what that's about. We know where we are in history. There's a very remarkable moment in history, be it in Israel or be it in the Jewish community here. But these things change, at least to some degree. And the fundamental question is, why in the first place and how in the first place do we pursue this? I think this is something I certainly think about. I think from time to time, at least, it occurs to all of us in one form or another. So what I thought would be, I hope useful, really useful to us all, would be to take this bigger view and to ask some questions about that big question, being 30,000 feet, 50,000 feet, a zillion and a half million feet. But the bigger perspective, what is this enterprise all about? And it occurs to me that it hinges on ideas. And a part of us probably says, well, that is a particularly narrow way of looking at things. Ideas, you start to think about Ivy League offices and towers and something that's removed from life. And theory that has nothing much to do with reality because, people can get very lost in their heads. I know I can. And, it's important to say, well, what does this have to do with life on the ground? But if you think about it, there is a great deal to be said about the power of ideas. Let's provide a few examples before we get to anything PowerPoint oriented. An idea. Government only exists by the consent of the government. People withdraw their consent, we have to have a different government. Big idea in American history. Or the union must be preserved at all costs. Another big idea in American history. And an awful lot of people lost their lives over that one. The Jewish people is entitled to return to its ancestral homeland and to rebuild a Jewish life there for the sense of security and for the reentry into history.
Who said that?
Everybody in the Zionist enterprise. That's a very major part. How that gets to be expressed is 1,000 different languages and words, but that's the key idea behind the 19th century return to political Zionism, in one form or another. How about this one? Ukraine was never a nation. It's just a satellite of the Russian Federation and deserves nothing but our contempt. A lot of people are losing their lives over that. And we could develop many, many more. And if you think about it, we live our lives fundamentally by certain notions, certain ideas that really shape the way we act. And if the ideas don't suit us, maybe we change them, but they're very much part of a dialogue in our collective minds and in our personal minds. Now, a lot of the time when we talk about major Jewish ideas, we do it by means of contrast. Okay, so if Christianity believes X, then Judaism must believe Y. It must be the total opposite. And there's always not only temptation, there's something useful to say, well, let's draw a little contrast here so we can see a Jewish notion in relief, right? So if there is an emphasis in the Christian world upon the idea of belief, well, we're not really about that as much. We're about action. We are deed over creed. Okay. Has certain merit to it. We have, by the way, a group of Islamic students here today from a school in Windsor, and they were learning all about Judaism. They couldn't be more excited and interested in what goes on. They were happy, or a little jealous, I think, to know that we have fast days, but they only last for a day. Ramadan's coming, they're not excited. All entirely thrilled about the idea. There is original sin in Christianity. We don't have original sin, we must be different. And potentially, arguably superior because we don't have that idea. Some people would say. We have an old quip when Jews were a little bit more inclined to be a little bit more caustic about some of the Christian world. And it has to do with the New Testament. The New Testament, that say, according to some, would say, it is both good and it is new. But what is good is not new, and what is new is not good. So there is that kind of not a contrast, but it's, it's a joy that we don't have that, so we must be a little bit more interested in who we are as a result. Now, to draw contrast is an inevitable kind of thing when you walk into this territory. But I'm interested also in ideas on their own merits. And so I would like to promote an idea with the notion and the invitation for you to do the same in your lives. I can't see everybody on Zoom in this particular moment, but I know enough about you and about some of your thoughts and about your involvements to know that you take this Jewish enterprise really very serious. And I think that we only are enriched by the ideas that we might share in saying, what does it all mean? So I'd like to offer an idea basic definition, I think, of the Jewish experience that I am using for myself as just a model of how one might approach this entire. So then we'll go try to pick things apart a little bit. So I am going with the working definition that Judaism is the sum total of the divinely inspired religious and cultural expression of a distinct people. That nurtures it for its own well-being and to further the project of world repair and individual spiritual growth. That's a really big run-on sentence. And I grant you.
I can't write it.
So the key things in this definition that I find to be important are that we are talking about a sum total of the entirety of the Jewish experience. That's one. That we are distinct people. There is such a thing as a Jewish people. And it may range all the way from gefilte fish and matzo balls to tahina and hummus and harif and zillion Moroccan dishes and rice and Passover. But we are here with that entire, somebody else stand here. With the panoply of variety that we have in that Jewish experience. And most significantly, perhaps, that I believe that the Jewish existence of our people and of our way of looking at ways of looking at life is a project. It's not just self-serving. Now, it does serve our own purposes for survival, if you will, or well-being, thriving, which is the word I would prefer. But at the end of the day, it's also something that looks beyond itself to make a contribution to the world and to take each one of us who is a part of our community and everyone who, for that matter, lives as a being created in divine image and has something within them that is eternal and important and is a core of spiritual possibility which deserves to be nurtured. Just a tall order. It's a tall order. But the idea that there is something that we live for beyond our immediate material needs, I think is very much at the core of our Jewish experience. And I invite us to think about that for ourselves. So let's see if we can do that with the idea of unpacking, at least tonight, 3 or 4 ideas that I think inform this pathway. And again, I truly invite your own thoughts about this as well. This is where the part of the evening gets interesting. So let's see if we can do this. And I apologize to the Zoom folks if I don't see you all, but let's hopefully make it possible for us to be able to proceed accordingly.
Rabbi, I believe in you. Are you sharing your PowerPoint?
Oh, that would be helpful. Yes, it would. Hang on. Sorry.
That's okay. And I can if you need me to.
Okay, I think I found it. I'm scared. Can you share it for me to save us some time?
Absolutely. You'll just have to tell me when to advance.
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry to tie you up that way.
That's okay.
Okay, can you put it on? No, it's not there.
Stand by.
Okay. Oh. So here we go.
Perfect.
Okay, so we can go ahead. Are we sure?
Yes.
There we go.
Okay. Now, this may sound on the face of it as being a kind of given. But I don't think it's a given from the standpoint of how throughout our history, many people asserted that in various traditional ways of their various religious perspectives, there is one way in, and it's my way. In other words, If you are not able to be a card-carrying, accepting, faithful person who believes in this particular creed, you dare not apply, or you are not part of the definition. With the greatest amount of respect, I think it's fair to say that somebody who says, I have never had any belief whatsoever in the divinity of Jesus, I don't think that this person even maybe lived. I certainly don't think of that person as godly or divine or a Messiah. It might be challenging for most people in the Christian world to call that person a Christian, because that's a definitional kind of thing. To enter into Islam, one has to make a very strong statement about belief, without which it's not likely that one would be accepted. If you think about the variety of ways in for Judaism, it's, I think, striking how significant this set of pathways truly are. And I say that not because we are living in a very relatively liberal, in the broad sense of the term, world today that is very accepting and tolerant of varying kinds of expressions. I would like to suggest that it has always been the case that the pathway into Judaism, the pathways have been many, and that different people resonated with different elements of this in different times and places, and found something that they could tie themselves into. And how crucial that was from the standpoint of being able to say, aha, I have this great sensitivity here that I can now be able to really feel a close affinity with. There are a number of candidates. Let's have the next slide. We go to this. This is something that we haven't heard of. It's from the Talmud. And it's a very significant statement. I don't know if we could move that a little bit Lydia, or minimize the Zoom call for a second. The deeds that yield immediate fruit and continue to yield fruit in time to come. And look at the list. Honoring parents, deeds of kindness and love, attending the house of study morning and evening, hospitality, visiting the sick, helping the needy bride, especially, one who providing a dress sometimes, that's projects that do that. And those who would love to have a very lovely, at least a basic wedding, but have no funds for it. Very significant acts of dignity. Attending the dead is a major part of our tradition, right? The Hebrew term for a funeral is, anyone knows? Livaya, which means to accompany. Accompany. When we walk with a casket to a burial site, we attend a funeral. It's an accompanying thing. Not only this past week, but whenever you see funerals in Israel, somebody who has some renown, it's thousands and thousands of people. Last year, Kanievsky died, one of the great scholars of our era, in a country of 9 million people. 750,000 attended the funeral on the streets. It's a big thing. Probing the meaning of prayer. Notice that it doesn't say praying. Probing the meaning of prayer. Making peace between one person and another, and between husband and wife. So we can broadly say family life. And the study of Torah, Keneged Kulah, here is the most basic of them all, is equal to all of the others, is in some respect, even by some translations, superior to all the others. Now, I'll just ask the question broadly, and I'm sorry for the Zoom folks if it's hard to make this a part of the chat right now, but is there some commonality that links these things together? Is there some general statement we could make about what these elements include?
Positive.
They're positive things. And
There's also a sense of compassion and none of them can be measured quantitatively.
it's hard to measure them quantitatively. And the one other thing I would just add, okay, Marty?
All of them, none of them are about one person. Every single thing means community, honoring your parents, attending the dead, visiting the sick. It's not about the person, it's the expression of your values in relation to others.
Okay, so it is an outward gaze that takes place. And the other thing I might add, if I could, with respect to this, is that these are the kinds of things that one could probably do on a daily basis, or at least close to a daily basis. You don't have to like plan for many of these things and then get on an airplane and fly someplace to do it with a 3-month lead time of planning. They're very close to daily life for the most part that one could do. And the question then is there one value that predominates? Well, some would say that this suggests Torah predominates, the study of Torah, the blueprint of life, the inspiration, and the guidepost that tells us everything how to do these things, plus much more. But that isn't abundantly clear, but that's exactly what it means. So we have an initial notion here that, oh my goodness, the things that I do on a regular basis are things that could draw me closer to this Jewish enterprise, because there is a way of visiting the sick. There's an etiquette to it. And I would not only be helping somebody if I do that well, I would also be fulfilling a sense of God's wishes for us, to be theological for a moment. So there is, look around your lives. There's a multitude of ways of plugging in. And another slide, if you could, please.
Rabbi, can I add one comment?
Sure.
All of those things are things that are done here on earth. When they say about the Torah, lo b'shamayim. So it made me think there are things that we can do in our daily life.
Right. It is not in the heavens, right? It is not something that's theoretical and someplace over in Tibet, right? This is something we can do here.
Susan, can you tell us who's speaking? Because
Is that Robin? I
Yes,
don't know
it
who's-
was. It was.
Okay. I'm going by auditory cues here, so
Thank you.
it's a little hard. Okay, so here's something else that I wanted to. We all know that Torah is an enterprise of great emphasis in Jewish tradition. And in some communities, it is the preeminent idea. And it is though that scholar who sits in whatever place and spends up to 17 hours a day in study. It is the person who is paid to learn all day or makes it one's business to squeeze it in however one can, because it is one of these central values in Jewish life. But what I wanted us to see, even if we are talking about the idea of study being a preeminent kind of thing, it is not the case that we have it as a spoon-fed reality with no debate whatsoever. Even the meaning of this preeminent value of Torah is a matter of focus. This is our portion of the week to Tzaveh. It is not everyone's favorite portion because it has a portion. Maybe that was interesting. Because it is all about sanctuary and about various other ritual matters and clothing of the priests and so forth. But this visual here I tried to convey is from what's a rabbinic midrash. A lot is like the rabbinic Bible. In other words, you have a little bit of text, a couple of lines, and then all around it are multiple interpretations, few of which agree with each other in any serious ways. It is a dialogue and a give and take between the generations to try to say, well, what about this? And what about that? And why do we have these instructions for kindling the lamps here? We don't have the tabernacle been constructed yet. What's going on here? And we have a Nachmanides who's proto-mystical. And we have a Rashi who is very much oriented towards the simple meaning of the text. And we have many, many others in a new translation and an old translation. You could spend your life on a page of this, at least many hours. And the idea is the more that one does that, the more that one is following a certain sense of the divine will, but it's debate, it's give, it's take. And the more you start getting involved in that, the more you are doing something that is an expression of a divinely inspired pathway. We were talking earlier this morning, this afternoon, I forget which class I was going to, that we were talking about, you walk into a public library and you walk into a traditional Jewish milieu and you put on your earplugs because you can't hear yourself think because it's so noisy. But they give it. Okay, onward, please. Okay. But sometimes it's not the Torah that's mentioned at all. It's not even a part of the picture per se. If you go back biblically, this is one of the most beautiful lines, I think, in the entire literature of the prophets. Look what Jeremiah asks. He was in the 6th century BC, a long time ago. Okay. What is wisdom? What is the kind of thing that's worth bragging about in the locker room after the game, so to speak? Right? Only in this one word, earnest devotion to me. It could be worship, but it's more than that. For I, the Lord, act of kindness, you do the same thing. I am the fount of justice and equity in the world. For these things I delight. That's what your life should be about too. So one of the agendas of a writer like Joseph Telushkin is to say, and he's an Orthodox Jew, in the Jewish enterprise, it's ethics first. Ritual is interwoven all the way through. It's like a text, but it's ethics first. Now, I know many a soul who is so many wonderful, kind people with their generosity as a core part of their beings. And it is informed by many different things. There may not be the most, by their own self-descriptions, the most ritually practicing people, but this casts that kind of commitment, which I know speaks to many, many people, as a deeply spiritual expression. And that's crucial. That's a crucial kind of thing. And I believe, we'll talk about this another times, I hope, that the ritual expressions of Judaism and the ethical expressions of Judaism have a way of reinforcing each other. They have a way of buttressing each other. But the way in for a lot of people is through a sense of ethics. Onward. The event starts, by the way, in about 11 hours or 20 some hours. I'm hoping we'll stay right through it to be able to get through all this.
Are we gonna practice the 24-hour study holiday where you don't sleep?
Yeah, that's this one. I forgot to tell you.
Store.
Yeah, I know. We're gonna catch them out. So, the Talmud has a way of expressing things in a very direct and kind of compelling way. It doesn't always say, it kind of feels like it says, this is the way it is. And I just found this a very striking thing. It's straightforward. What is the first thing you will be asked when a person is brought to the heavenly court for judgment? We'll talk about afterlife stuff another time. But let's just take the image for just a minute. Is it a question of, were you loyal in your prayer life? Were you a student of Torah? No. It's again, very daily, ordinary kinds of things to an extent. Were you honest in business? Pay your taxes the right way. Did you charge a reasonable amount as opposed to price gouging your customers? Did you return lost objects? Okay. Did you set aside regular time for Torah study? It doesn't mean you're a Torah scholar all of your days, right? Did you give it some time on a regular basis? Did you work at having children? That's a very fraught thing these days, understandably. I think it is very easily cast as a notion that we're talking about supporting the future generation. Did you support the enterprise of schools? Did you support the experience of a new generation moving forward? And did you look forward to the world's redemption? Did you manage to find a way of keeping yourselves optimistic, hopeful, and to try to make this world a better place and anticipate that it is possible? That it is possible. Next slide, please. Because whatever else we could disagree about, I can't imagine anybody who disagrees with this sentence. and from the Talmud, that the world endures solely by the virtues of the breath of school children. In other words, when we say things, and I'm sure you've heard this a zillion times, you probably could write the speeches yourself, that we're all about lador vador, from one generation to the next. But it's not a catchphrase. It's a sense that we are building an enterprise, and that to pass on values from one generation to the next.
This was said thousands of years ago.
Thousands of years ago. It's a couple of thousand. And, you know, by the way, those of you interested in the history of education, arguably one of, if not the first, mandatory educational enterprises for children up to a certain age came from the Jewish world. It wasn't a question of if you feel like it. Even if your kids were going to be out on a farm helping to plow and to harvest and do whatever, they had to be taught also. They were taught Torah, right? But they had to be taught. All right, let's go on. This is a second, this is also a corollary of it. If our first thought is that there are many pathways into Judaism, the way in which Judaism gets expressed is in partnership. In a lot of religious traditions, the idea is, I am the almighty deity, you do what I say, and that's the end of the discussion. And we do have passages in the Torah that talk an awful lot about following God's ways. Don't want to pretend otherwise. But there is a sense of yearning in Jewish expression, in Jewish experience, that speaks about the idea of how indeed we have to have a sense of partnership because God wants a sense of partnership. The next slide, please. I could have put this with the next theme, but I just thought this was funny, so I decided we needed a humorous break. I'm a 19th century German Jewish writer. He ultimately converted to Christianity, but he was always a little uncomfortable about this. He also was the one who said that Judaism, history speaks with a Hebrew accent, that redemption has that quality. So he never quite used it that entirely. He thought that God would forgive them. Sure, that's what God does. That's how God makes a living. So I figured we needed to have that sense of, you know, we have the divine as part of that element of partnership that comes into our lives. Go ahead, please, Lydia. As much as we have a castigation, a kind of ongoing critique of the Jewish behavior, of the Israelites' behavior, if you look at the Torah as a whole, the Hebrew Bible as a whole, Tanakh as a whole, you see that there is one figure who is desperately lonely throughout the entirety of it. And that figure is God. My people have spurned me. I want relationship with this people. Many times, when we have these images, we all know our Father, our King, right? Avinu Malkeinu. I'm just giving a direct translation. I'm not changing it to our parent. It's our Father, our King. That's what it says, right? We have that image. We have God as teacher very often, but we also have God as lover. As a lover who would like to draw close again to the people that has often said, not interested. Come back to me is part of that image. And the idea is here reflected, this is included in the high conflict liturgy, right? Israel was a child, I loved him, I fought flying to want the tenderness here, in this case of a parent who's hoping to have a rejuvenation, a reunion with the child, that people are turning away from me. I'm not mad at them, I'm not going to beat up on them. I miss you. How can I turn you over? My heart is here, my heart is filled with compassion. I need you back. I need you back. And then we find other elements of this too. There's this idea in Isaiah that you will be my God, and my witnesses as well, right? I as God rather will be your God, and you will be my witnesses. To which the Talmud responds, if the people are not witnesses, they're not willing to be witnesses, then God cannot be God. It's like the tree falling in the forest. Did it really fall? No one's there to hear it. God can't really be God unless the people are prepared to be in partnership, in relationship, which is a theme that a few of you have mentioned. I think that's a very powerful idea, that it is a covenant that is based on that partnership. I have at least. And here's something that's crucial, and this sounds so silly, I suppose, but if you think about this very, very concretely, how radical this idea is in Jewish life, perhaps, although we take it as a given at some levels, I suppose, but also from the standpoint of life lived more broadly. Are people capable of changing?
Do they have free will?
If they have free will,
If they want,
and if they want. Not every culture, not every society really believes that it is possible to change. And it's not only a matter of free will, it's that some would suggest we are so constructed that change is at best, a fool's errand. That we are stuck with who we are. It's all nature in a large sense of the term. And nothing can really make a difference. We'll see how that plays.
that means there's no end result yet.
There's my myself. Well, yeah, we'll see. Well, let's go ahead. This is one of the crudest set of pictures I could imagine to a degree, but I wanted to bring this to your attention. In ancient societies, there is this idea that you see expressed in a variety of ways. The anthropologists who are with us today are going to cringe. I know, I'm sorry, I'm not going to give it in all of its depth, but I want to make a basic statement. Through the writings of people like, say, Eliade and others, a lot of what the ancient world was based on was a notion that human action is largely to repeat what a hero or a god or a deity does at the beginning of time. Those gods don't change, those heroes don't change. And the best we can really do is to try to imitate what they did back then. But then we have the cycles of time in which we are essentially stuck. And there isn't really any way out of that, because we are here to repeat those cycles. You know, the winter's sort of ebbing, we're going to go into spring, we're going to have summer, it'll be hot, it'll be miserable, we'll complain, we'll think nostalgically about snow, it'll be fall, and then we're back to where we started. And okay, back, is anything really different? Not so much. Not so much. And then the graphic on this right side is there for two reasons. One is it looks like the stock market in a good market. And I thought we could all use a little bit of encouragement on that level. But also, Jews and Judaism thought of life and movement in a more linear way, aligned. It's aligned with zigs and zags because it's never perfect. But that ultimately life can, should, and hopefully always will move forward to a better place. Tikkun olam is a very loaded term and has a bunch of historical possibilities to it, the repair of the world. But ultimately, the world is, if not perfectible, it is reparable. It is potentially made better. And humans are partners in the divine of doing. That's why we are here. And the way in which that is done is manifold. It's not only through social justice work, it is also made possible through various ways in terms of Jewish mysticism, aligning ourselves with forces in the divine. If you want to go back in terms of its history, it's many levels. But ultimately, we get to a point where we have what we call a messianic era. But we have to help make it there. And the possibilities of being partners with the divine and doing that is a very pipeline in forming of dignity of a human being. That the acts that we do make a difference. It matters. It matters what we are capable of doing. Go ahead, please. Not everybody believes that we can change. I had the good fortune or the misfortune, depending on what you want to say, of attending University of Minnesota when B.F. Skinner had a sabbatical. And he taught there for a bunch of years, actually, as it turned out. And, we all were, first year college students, taking psychology, and we're going to learn about how Freud worked and how you become a counselor. No, we were putting rats through mazes. We were figuring out pigeons and how many times they would peck at the thing to get their little pellet of food, and then we would record the random reinforcement schedules. For this, we're going to. But the idea behind it was a very powerful idea. People do not act on their environments. The environment acts upon you. You think you have free will to change everything? It's all about the reinforcements you receive from the environment. You are a little different than the rat running through the maze looking for food. Now, to the degree to which people could be shaped that way, obviously rewards do that. But to the extent that that's a view of humanity that is limited to that expression, I have to say is anathema to a Jewish consciousness, at least as I read it. But a lot of the world has versions of this and thinks accordingly. And that, is something that would be a countervailing force. Another slide, please. What we do on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and even before that, is something that is little less than miraculous, if you think about it. The idea of repentance is a celebration of one of the greatest capacities we have, which is to change direction. And although a lot of the terms and a lot of the expressions of that have a certain harshness to them sometimes, or rampant, there's also a broader, more dignified way of looking at this that I think is really celebrated. So to throw out a question for us, right? When we think of the word sin in Hebrew, what is the word that comes to mind most quickly? Chet, right? I'm not going to sing it. I have more respect for you than that. Chet, right? And that's not the only word for sin that we have, right? We have Pesha, we have Aveira, a bunch of other things, right? Over Arian, one who doesn't, heed to what they're supposed to do. But the basic word we use more than any word is chet. And one of the key ideas in the word chet is to miss a mark. To miss a mark. So it's like you're looking for the bullseye and you don't make it. If you miss a mark, arguably, it is possible to retool, to practice, to get better. That's, again, I think a very hopeful notion, a very significant celebration of what we can say. And if you contrast what Rabbi says here with what Skinner said in the previous maze with the rat, a place where penitents stand is higher than those who are just naturally righteous. It's a place, and then there's a proof text with peace, who is upon the peace and creating. First to those who are far, just to say they've gone off the mark, so to speak, but they're trying to get there. And they're up here. The righteous, by this mode of thinking, are good. That's wonderful. They're here. It is really, really hard to make that kind of change. But at the same time, it is an exalted, magnificent thing to see that happen. Now, it has its limitations. Next slide, please. It's not without limitation, right? You can't wake up in the morning and say, well, I'm going to blow it today deliberately, but then I'll repent. Then I'll do it again tomorrow, and then I'll repent. And it doesn't matter too much what's going on because Yom Kippur is coming. Well, that doesn't wash. Okay. That doesn't wash because that doesn't take behavior seriously. So it does have its limitations. So, but the sincerity of someone who tries to make that difference in their lives is celebrated and encouraged. And again, part of us that we have. Okay, onward, please.
Well, spectacle.
Perhaps. Well, addictions are part of that world. Some of the most spiritually oriented people I've ever met are people who are focused on that. And those meetings are remarkable for what they seek to achieve, that sense of spirituality in somebody.
one step at a time.
One step at a
Get to
time.
the end immediately.
Right. That's right. And here we have a definition. How do you know you've made it? To a degree, it's never finished, right? But how do you know that you've really changed your behavior? So it has a measuring. You have attempted to do your best. You get that same opportunity to do the same thing, right? That hole in the yard is there. You know you could walk around it, but you could fill it in, but the hole is still there. And you know what? Sometimes you just find it that you're just falling again right into that same hole in the backyard, as opposed to, I don't have to do that. I don't have to make that mistake, that error, that hurtful comment, that difficult kind of a moment with somebody just to prop up my own ego or whatever it is. I'm just giving some possible examples. So, and then a charitable understanding of what happens. There's even this sense of, how many people really wake up in the morning and willfully say, I'm going to hurt so-and-so, or I'm going to do something terribly unhealthy to myself or hurtful to myself just because I feel like it. Or I'm going to, just blow off this entire Jewish identity thing because, well, why not? People don't normally act quite that way. So the idea is that in people's best moments, in their best moments, they don't act that way. They don't fall from a reasonable path. There is a momentary lack of awareness. There's a sense of being not aware of the moment and then falling from that. But in their best intentions, they wouldn't otherwise. And again, that's reparable. It's hopefully we help each other to have awareness and to walk that back. Okay. Onward, and we're going to be on our last section. Isn't that great, Kyle?
You should draw it yourself.
And this, I'm going to be very brief with this because I want to be able to close off some of your thoughts. We're going to be coming up to the Golden Path episode next week. So you're allowed to read it ahead of time, but just tune in otherwise. So remember that simple little circle diagram we had with the circle? The Israelites are told not to make graven images. That's the next slide. And we all know that one, right? Let's go ahead. Why not? Just so we can. We only have 2 left, I believe. Right. 10 Commandments: don't make yourself a sculptured image, and you likeness of what is there in the heavens above or earth below. Don't bow down to them and serve them. They get out of Egypt, and one of the first things they do is they build a golden calf.
Have a ring first, though. Chairs.
I knew that sometime that was going to come up. Those are sanctioned at least, but we'll get into it. Okay, I know. Sorry, it's a complicated issue.
It's a mindful.
Okay. Something that it just occurred to me, and I came across earlier this week. I don't know why it never hit me before. We had that kind of contrasting image of the circle, and we have the line. The line hopefully making progress. The Israelites are depicted in the story dancing around the golden calf in a circle. It's as if they are falling into the fatalistic kind of world of which they were a part of in Egypt. What they should have been doing is preparing themselves to march forward with boldness. And ultimately, in Jewish life, idolatry becomes this mark of delineation of not am I going to have a statue in my backyard and bow down to it, but rather of what we would call a sense of priorities that goes awry. And that biblically, at least we can say, what are you going to build? Are you going to build a sanctuary like you're supposed to? Or are you going to build a bunch of golden calves? And with all of the service we have today, I think that it is still a useful category because of that. Our last slide, and this great finding from really very interesting writer, Tish Harrison Warren, writes religiously oriented articles for the New York Times. Not too many Protestant pastors or asked to do this, but she has a very wonderful facility with language. And I like this very much because it's very Jewish, so I don't know that she intends it to be that. Look at this, if you can read it, I'll just highlight one part of it. The idea of idolatry is not necessarily having false gods that we can name. Sometimes it is, but not necessarily. It isn't always necessary to name them or sculpt for that matter. It is a term for disordered love. It's when you take something that could be quite good, but our devotion to it becomes obsessive, overwhelming, and can crowd out other kinds of priorities. There is something marvelous about a lonely teen in suburban or not rural Idaho, someplace I'm making up a place, because of social media can have some sense of connection because they share an interest in I don't know, gardening or in certain kinds of music or in art or whatever it is. That's a beautiful boon to somebody. But if that same element of life causes that person to question their self-worth, and they are on the receiving end of bullying or of impossible expectations to meet, with unattainable elements of beauty and celebrity and everything else, and you can't get off of that because it's just too immediately accessible at all times, then it's a different kind of disorder relationship with a reality. And we see in so many realms of life, we can probably all come up with examples ourselves, where things that start out being, in some respect, neutral or even quite positive, can take over our mental universe, our behavioral experience, and becomes a source of great concern. And then there just isn't room. There isn't room for what we would think about as, what is the sense of the most important things in life? Where is a sense of who I am as a person in this world, as opposed to what do I have to do to attain the next level of wealth or celebrity or, promotion? That just doesn't become a possibility. There's just not room. There's no breathing space for it. And so I think that we are looking at this. This is for Maimonides, for example, the key concern in Judaism, not to commit idolatry in many different ways. And he's not only talking about Israel, talking about stones, but talking about rather ways in which we make almost a fetish out of certain kinds of things, even the ways we talk about God, as opposed to saying, let's talk about what really should be at the forefront of our consciousness and of our actions. So in closing, let me say a couple of summary statements, if I can, and then I'll open things up a bit if we can. And that is, if we think about it, at least in my mind, Judaism as this very wide open and very expansive project, which for people that only numbers 13 million in the world is pretty impressive. To be able to say, we are not here for this world for survival. We are here to seek partnership. We are here, in the words of the Tosafot, to create in our hearts a home of many rooms. And to be able to find ways of living sacred deeds, of having greater sensitivity, of standing for something, of seeing ourselves in partnership with others and with God, to be creative beings, to make something happen in this world. Then we're living a pretty meaningful life. And a lot of people will be helped along the way. So that's kind of a summary statement, if you will. Okay, we'll take 3 hours for other expressions, thoughts, questions, or comments. We'll try to do Zoom as well if we can. Karen?
I was really by this passage when Israel was a child.
Yes.
For me, what it's saying is that we need to be accountable for our actions, and we're not blaming anyone else for, saying, how can I give you love? What can I do how can I turn you over? Like, what can I do to get you back? And it's putting the accountability on self, right? You're not expecting anyone to do anything that you're not willing to work on as well. And it's sort of the kind of forgiving, there's a forgiving nature to a lot of your sharing tonight. That Judaism has a high degree of forgiveness in its overall message. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And again, many of us have worn glasses all of our lives, or at least part of our lives. And, we have this whole wide range of what we have in this Jewish experience, but we look at it through certain lenses, and that should be acknowledged. There are those who that clearly find themselves as very committed Jews who might look at this entire panoply of things and see it very differently. But I think that we have not only the right, but the responsibility to wear certain kinds of lenses that are oriented towards the charitable, towards the open to the expressive nature of what we can do and build with each other. Good. Any other thoughts from anybody? And then Roberta, and then I don't want to miss anybody on Zoom, so forgive me if I'm not seeing you.
Well, how many of us before tonight don't have to answer the question? Thought about so many things. And who has time? Who thinks about it? Who is motivated to think about so many things as you have so beautifully described to us tonight? You have to have the time to do it. You have to have the time, but you have to have the inclination. You have to have a moment of motivation. And if you have all that, and that means you are expanding your horizons, looking at it through different lenses, whichever, then yes, we can change. But so many people are on a treadmill, going over and over and over and doing the same thing all the time. They get up, they go to work, they come home, and they dinner, and it's the same routine.
Life is busy, It's
And
one
so
right
I
up
would trust that the opportunity to change, at least for one day,
Right.
but so many of us don't even think about it, but you have given us so much food for thought. Thank you.
No, it's okay. Thank you. Thank you for saying it's one right up, but once the problem with life is that it takes too much of your time. And the elements of what we do, do carve out that opportunity for reflection. But I think it's worth trying to carve out some time to do that.
Was it as a driven leaf? That really was how far you have to go before it's too far to turn around.
Sounds like it'd be part of it, yes. To be sure. Anybody on Zoom? I'm sorry if I'm not paying enough attention to anyone here. Right?
You have a
Well,
very attentive crowd of thousands, Rabbi Rosen.
Thousands, yes. Okay. Forgive me, Lydia, can everybody do a little round of applause?
Jasmine put together a fabulous presentation with you, Rabbi Rosen, and I'm just glad she told me where it was.
Me too. And we practiced it 3 times and I still managed to get rid of it live. But thank you all. And, this is a new mode of teaching for me. So I'm hoping that it's going to go along. Because I ideally would love to be in a room with all of us to be all feel comfortable doing so, hashing this out in person. But one way or another, it's just so good to see everyone's faces. And please feel free to tune in the emails and so. And we'll all see you soon, sometime soon.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Rosen.
Next week.
Thank you, Rabbi Rosen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lydia.
Rabbi, shalom, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting.
You are.
Do good. Don't just sit there. Do something. Don't believe in worthless things.
Better.
Nice meeting you.